Back in the day, it used to be that movies released in January or February were immediately deemed graveyard fodder, because studios used those early months of the year to send things out to quietly die. For the most part, that mentality has started to change in recent years, thanks to the perpetual extension of the summer blockbuster period. Seriously, summer now starts in February and then ends in December. And of course, the unquenchable thirst for comic book movies that has meant staggering releases to avoid competition is a big part of the marketing campaign as much as the trailers. These days, a great release in February is a license to print money, precisely because the early months graveyard slot still hasn't gone away entirely. If you get it right, like Black Panther did, you'd be laughing because there's simply no real competition aside from Oscar re-releases for the most part. So with that in mind, Warner Brothers' decision to release Birds of Prey into cinemas in February should have been a genius move that paid off in spades. This was, after all, the return of Harley Quinn, the one shining light of Suicide Squad, in a film sculpted so firmly around her presence that the title was horribly extended to include her name. Stack on top of Harley's presence the fact that Birds of Prey was initially presented as kind of a counterpoint to Suicide Squad, and also a palate cleanser to rid the world finally of Jared Leto's Joker, and there was even more reason for box office wizards to predict a big opening weekend. Now that the film is out though, those figures don't seem to have materialized, despite the film being really good. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and this is why Birds of Prey just disappointed at the box office. First up, why it's disappointing. Okay, first things first, it's not like the film is an absolute Doolittle-sized bust, but the 33.2 million stateside and 81.2 million worldwide opening is very much being called a disappointment. That's largely down to the fact that projections initially had the domestic opening tracking at around 50 to 55 million, and Warner Brothers allegedly wanted 45 million with an overseas forecast of over 110. They might seem like numbers plucked out of the air, but there's a precise science to them. Projections now have a domestic box office failing to hit 100 million, which isn't entirely disastrous, but it's bad, particularly with the Chinese market wiped out by the coronavirus. Strangely, this box office disappointment isn't one you can pinpoint on critical malaise, as we could have with Suicide Squad if that had died a death on release, because the Rotten Tomatoes score on release was 81% and the cinema score was a B+, which is exactly what Joker pulled in and also where Suicide Squad sat. Those movies made an absolute fortune, but it seems that Birds of Prey is lagging behind. And one reason why could be the Suicide Squad conundrum. There are some out there who will say that comparing Birds of Prey to Suicide Squad in particular is unfair, given the former's smaller budget. But we're not talking about a micro-budget film here, and we're not talking about Warner Brothers consciously pulling their punches. This is a huge brand for them. Harley Quinn is a huge brand for them. They put a good chunk of change behind her tale of emancipation. It's not a matter of scaling back expectations from blockbuster territory, because this is, for all intents and purposes, a proper blockbuster. However, part of the problem with Birds of Prey, somewhat ironically, is its relationship with Suicide Squad. If that film hadn't been so bad, we might have been looking at a more substantial win for its spin-off, just not in the way you'd probably think. Birds of Prey has been marketed as not just a spin-off to Suicide Squad, but an answer to it as well. A rebuttal, kind of, taking apart all of the issues with the David Ayer-helmed monstrosity. The film is a conscious opportunity for Warner Brothers to say that they made a mess of Suicide Squad, just as bringing James Gunn in to replace it with a reboot equal thing also is as well, but there is something fatal to that thinking. That's because if you go back to Suicide Squad's release, Warner Brothers were actually taking a completely different position on the film. They were saying, oh, Suicide Squad isn't all that bad, it's the critics that are wrong, like they were Principal Skinner or something. The official stance was that this was a film made for the fans, and of course the critics wouldn't like it because it's not made for them. That message became such an integral part of the marketing campaign, in fact, that they effectively weaponized the whole critics versus real fans dynamic more than any other film in modern times. Fans weren't just coming out to watch a film anymore, they were coming out to thumb their nose at critics, those pumped up parasites and not the good Oscar-winning kind, who didn't care to make things for themselves, but would happily sit and pick apart someone else's hard work. It worked an absolute treat, no matter how you feel about using that sort of toxic fandom to reap catalyst benefits. It undeniably worked. Anyway, the real issue here is that suddenly turning against the whole logic that underpins Suicide Squad and consciously positioning Birds of Prey as a reclamation of Harley Quinn as a victim of that movie was always going to alienate the fans who went out to see Suicide Squad. or at least an element of them anyway. Imagine the inner conflict of being told that Suicide Squad is great and for the fans, but then also that it wasn't great and it wasn't for the fans and this movie was going to fix all of its issues. It's not only difficult to keep up with that logic, it's profoundly insulting. Couple that with the people who felt that Suicide Squad was an irredeemable mess that didn't even deserve a spin-off or a sequel, and you can probably account for a good deal of the initial audience of Suicide Squad not buying tickets for Birds of Prey. There are other issues to explore here though, including the other issues. Firstly, it's worth noting that spin-offs rarely do as well as the thing they're spun off from in the first place. Hobbs & Shaw recently proved that the Fast and Furious brand isn't always platinum-plated, even with a similar title convention trick to Birds of Prey, and it's far from the only example. At the moment, Birds of Prey is going to deliver a massive 75% drop on Suicide Squad's opening weekend, proving in the simplest of mathematical points at least that there simply wasn't the same pull between the movies. And then you have to wonder about the pull of the brand in general. Suicide Squad's initial drawing power, all critical responses aside, came down to the magic of a stunning trailer, which Birds of Prey simply didn't have, plus the drawing power of Batman, even though his involvement was massively misrepresented in some circles. Not just a new Joker, but a radically different one, the dregs of Will Smith's star appeal, the debut of Harley Quinn, and the first bad guy team-up ever in comic book history. It was effectively pitched as the anti-Avengers movie and on paper had a bunch of appeal, or at least morbid curiosity as to how it was all going to turn out. Strip away all of the other points and you're left with Harley Quinn, the one chief selling point of this movie as per Warner Brothers' own strategies, and a message about killing Jared Leto's version of the Joker. Considering the unfortunate proximity to a movie about another Joker though, which is genuine Oscar fare, and the latter point isn't really a selling point that it might have been initially. So it's just Harley really at the end of the day. And that's not a dismissive point either, because Harley Quinn is one of the most enduring brands in the entire Bat family. Considering she largely came out of nowhere, that's all the more impressive. So here's a question. Why wasn't the film just called Harley Quinn, or at the very least, Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey? Why split your brand with something that only means something to die-hard comics fans? And then why mess with the comics lore on top of that? It's like the film doesn't fully understand who it's actually aimed at. And even more crucially, you have to consider the demographic. Harley is popular with precisely the key fans that Warner Brothers have kept out of cinemas because of their decision to give the movie an R rating. While there's some thinking these days in the wake of Deadpool and Logan that a hard R is a badge of honor and something to market, it's also kind of counterproductive when a key audience is young female fans. That's because you've just alienated your most mobile ticket buyers. The hard R only really sells to people who are already going out to see a Harley Quinn movie, so it's counterproductive from the get-go. For me, the R rating does make it a way more enjoyable movie, but from a business standpoint, it undeniably hurt the box office. And then there's the more distasteful part of this story that I sadly cannot ignore. Whether the film ever intended it or not, the marketing inspired the same response in parts of the fandom as Ghostbusters and Charlie's Angels did. And finally, the no-event feeling and backlash. Birds of Prey are a team from the comic who warranted their own story. There are characters in there, Harley Quinn, Black Mask predominantly, but also the other Birds members who have brand power among comic book fans, but thanks to a strangely tepid marketing campaign, the Birds of Prey online discourse was once again dominated by pointless back and forths over whether or not the film was woke. Considering the impact of similar marketing campaigns, those two films I already mentioned, and also Terminator Dark Fate, you might have thought that Warner Brothers would have tried to distance itself from those messages quite so loudly in the marketing. They didn't though, and I mean it's kind of hard when you have emancipation in the title and the wrong elements of the community leapt on it. The vitriol that comes with something being picked up as woke from these communities doesn't single-handedly bring a film down, but it doesn't help when the first page of your Metacritic user reviews are mostly 0s out of 10s from people throwing around criticisms like woke garbage and bringing the overall score down. More broadly in terms of the marketing though, there's also a big issue with how Birds of Prey was represented. Thanks to the dreaded reshoots and a studio-necessitated recut on the back of alleged poor first test reactions, the marketing team couldn't pull a Suicide Squad. They simply didn't have the material for it. So a marketing campaign kicked off by Harley's cameo as part of It Chapter 2's release had no haymaker to it. There was no event feel to the film, and while the trailers were solid, they were far from spectacular. And that's just part of Warner Brothers' wayward thinking in failing to turn this into a proper event movie. Why were advanced tickets only put on sale a week and a half out from release? Why wasn't more of a big deal made of advanced sales in general when that could be a selling point into itself? And why the decision not to copy other February comic book movies and release during the Valentine's Day, President's Day weekend? The data was all there, and they just ignored it. It looks like Birds of Prey's disappointing opening has been a perfect storm of lots of different things then, and we can only hope that more people go out to see it through word of mouth, because it is bloody good. I mean, I loved it. You can go check out mine and Zoe's review on the main channel. We had a bloody good time with this film. It's not like it's Doolittle is all I'm saying. Like, that kind of deserved it. So that's our video on why Birds of Prey failed at the box office. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Did you manage to go out and see it over the weekend, and did you enjoy it? Did you not like it? Or were you just kind of meh on the whole thing? Either way, while you're down there, can you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.